Inshallah, today we want to speak about an extremely important topic. And this topic pertains to every single one of us. It relates to every single one of us. And that is the topic of huquq, the rights of one another. And more specifically, the rights of one another when it comes to wealth, al-huquq al-maliyah. And inshallah, today I want to touch on 4 or 5 of these rights, which unfortunately most of us are aware of. However, a lot of us do not practice upon these rights. When we look at wealth, we find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes it as being a fitna. He says, إِنَّمَا أَمْوَالُكُمْ وَأَوْلَادُكُمْ fitna. Indeed, the wealth that you have, as well as your children, are a form of fitna, trial and tribulation. Wealth, more specifically, you find those who have a lot of wealth, it has its fitan, it has its trials, it has its problems. Those who have less wealth, it also has its fitan and trials and tribulations. Those who are in the middle, it also has its fitan and trials and tribulations. And as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described it as being a fitna, it's a trial and a tribulation. And due to this, and due to the fact that the human being loves goodness for themselves, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَتُحِبُّونَ الْمَالَ حُبًّا جَمًّا. When it comes to wealth, you love it a lot. Because of this love of it that a person already has, you find that when it comes to the distribution of this wealth, and when it comes to being fair in transactions, Allah Himself is the one who put down the law. Allah Himself is the one who decided what is fair and what is not fair. Allah Himself is the one who decided when it comes to inheritance who will get what and who will not get what. Why? Because if it was left to the human being, you find that they would have most definitely oppressed one another. And everybody would be looking for that which is most favorable towards themselves. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He alone decided certain things and nobody has a say after it. Inshallah, today I want to mention about 5 of these. The first is when it comes to inheritance. When it comes to inheritance, Allah Jalla wa Ala Himself has dedicated so many verses when speaking about who deserves what. And He mentions the different halat, the different conditions where if a person has so many children or their parents are alive, etc., who gets what? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who decided. So the first piece of advice for myself and yourselves is, death is written for every single one of us. You will witness those who die, and you yourself will die. So you yourself will have to go through this one day. Your wealth and your belongings will be distributed. There is no running away from it. So whilst you are alive, you've got to understand that when it comes to this distribution of wealth, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who laid down the law. And if you are alive and you've got a share in something, for example, let's say the person who passed away, they left the heirs with so much wealth. Amongst themselves, they've got to go according to the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And number 2, which is an overlooked, in fact, it's a sticky point amongst most people, is you have to distribute the wealth. How many times people die and they leave millions and tens of millions, and you find that the people who are left that wealth, they can't distribute it. You find this one says, I want to sell, the other one doesn't want to sell. You find that there is always a dispute when it comes to these things. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, fariidatan min Allah. This is a fariida, this has been made compulsory, this has been ordained to you by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And thereafter He says, tilka hududullah. These are the limits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Don't transgress those limits. So my beloved brothers and sisters in Islam, if you are in a position where you are inheriting wealth, be fair to one another. Go with the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And point number 2, don't delay in the distribution of the wealth. And you find, yes, it is difficult, especially when there's a lot of wealth. So for example, you find that 5 people need to inherit one building. And then from those 5 who need to inherit, 3 say we want to sell the building, and 2 say we want to keep the building. Obviously, we've got to be fair to every single person. It may not be possible to sell the building immediately and get your price. And at the same time, those who want to sell and get their wealth, you cannot delay them for years on end. So you've got to all sit down and come to a good understanding. For example, it could be that, okay, we will pay you out slowly, something which is decent. Don't oppress one another, especially when it comes to wealth. How many people were supposed to inherit a sum of wealth, and because it took so long, you find that this person who was supposed to inherit, they died. They didn't inherit. And then their heirs are now fighting for the inheritance of what was owed to their parent. This should never be the case, my beloved brothers and sisters in Islam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decided, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, distribute the wealth. It doesn't belong to you. It belongs to those who are supposed to inherit. So that's point number 1, my beloved brothers and sisters in Islam. Point number 2 is when it comes to collecting zakah and sadaqah on behalf of others. You find at times there may be an organization, there may be a masjid, a person in their own capacity. At times people volunteer to say, we're going to do a project in such and such a location and we're raising money. Every single cent you raise, you will be asked about that money. Every single cent. Why? You're raising money on behalf of a cause. It's not your money. You have no right to collect that money and then delay and put off the project till further notice. The fact that you've taken from others and you promised them that you are going to fulfill, you've got to fulfill that promise. Also, when it comes to profiteering of charity, you find at times people, they say that this project will cost us 100,000. However, the actual cost of the project is only 20,000. If a person put the wages and the work and the effort and all sorts, maybe 30,000. By what right did you eat the other 70,000? By what right? Most definitely you will be asked by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You've got to be fair. In the same way, if it was your wealth, you would be looking over it, you would be looking for every single cent and how it was spent. Similarly, what about the wealth that belongs to others? The wealth that was donated to a cause, that cause belongs to those people. Look for that which is best for them. And most definitely, those who collect that wealth, they will be asked about it. And in the same breath, those who collect and do the right thing, those who fulfill their promises, those who fulfill their projects, inshallah, their reward is great with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because you are doing something for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're helping the wealth be distributed, and you're helping those who are the beneficiaries of that wealth to benefit from it. So that's point number 2, my beloved brothers and sisters in Islam. Point number 3, when it comes to some of the rights regarding wealth, is business, profit and loss. If people go into partnership and they've agreed on some profit or some loss, whatever they may have agreed on, end of the year, end of 2 years, end of 5 years, whatever it may be, everybody is different. After you've agreed that the profit will be realized, for example, after we cover our costs and then 1 year later, 2 years later, pay the person who has a share in that business their due. You want to keep your money in the business as long as the business is not suffering. We're being fair to both sides. At times you can't take out all the wealth immediately. You need to pay your expenses, you need to grow, depending on the agreement you had. But you find at times 5 years past, 10 years past, every little cent you're throwing it back into your business. You yourself haven't benefited from it. Nobody around you has benefited from it. Why? At times the person wants to take out, but the other partners are saying, no, we can't take out. No, you're a shareholder. If you're 10%, you want to take it out and you've agreed with everybody, let him take out his share. It's only fair for him. The other way you can do it is if you are reinvesting your share, have an agreement to say slowly your share will diminish. We will be buying your share. Whatever good Islamic agreement you have. But my point is, don't delay somebody else when it comes to their right in the wealth. They can do with their wealth whatever they want to do as long as it's permissible. They want to reinvest it, they want to put it somewhere else, they need to use it for their own needs. Give it to them. It's theirs at the end of the day. My beloved brothers and sisters in Islam, in the same breath we speak about profit, we also speak about loss. There is a famous rule in the Sharia where the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, some say it's a hadith, others mention a rule derived from a hadith, al-ghunmu bil-ghurman or al-ghurmu bil-ghun. If a person profits, there has to be some sort of loss that they're able to take on. The transaction cannot be one-sided where you only benefit. That's why interest is impermissible. So in the same breath, everybody talks about profit, but also when it comes to loss, be fair when it comes to sharing the loss. You find at times somebody loses in a deal. The loss is there, it's written, so much money. However, they themselves, they don't want to take the loss, they make everybody else take the loss. And you find people go to great lengths to write the loss off on the shares of the other partners so they are saved. That is haram and not allowed. Stick to the agreement. How does a person expect their wealth to be blessed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if you are not fair in your dealing? So my beloved brothers and sisters in Islam, be fair when it comes to this profit and loss, as well as sharing in a business. Not everybody is equal. Not everybody can do what the other does exactly. Look at your roles. Look at who plays their part here or there, etc. and be fair with who gets what. Point number 4, my beloved brothers and sisters in Islam, is when it comes to gifting and when it comes to hibah. If you are a parent or you've got your children, your grandchildren, whoever it may be just when it comes to giving a gift. And justice doesn't always necessarily mean equality. So for example, if you have a child who is 20 years old and a child who is 2 years old, if you're giving the one who is 20 a car, it doesn't mean you have to give the one who is 2 a car. He can't use it for the next so many years. But be fair in your gifting. Don't give, especially when the children are similar age, similar ability, similar capability. If you gift one, gift the others also, and be fair. And similarly to the parents and the guardians, if a child or somebody young has been gifted something by others, yes, if they're still young and they can't look after it, you look after it for them. But when they reach the age where they're able to, it may be wealth, they're able to use it, it may be some possession, give it to them. It belongs to them, it doesn't belong to you. So we've got to be fair and we've got to be just when it comes to gifting. And point number 5, which is the most important and the most prevalent and the most common, and that's why I've delayed it today, is when it comes to debt. When it comes to debt, and this is of different types. So you find at times somebody tells you to keep money for them. If you're unable to keep the money, you know yourself not to be honest, please don't keep their wealth. If you decide that, you know what, I'm going to keep the money for them, and you have your agreement that they'll come whenever they need it, they'll give you notice, etc., pay them what's due to them. You took their money for safekeeping. You agreed to keep their money. It's supposed to be ready. They ask you, they give you a week's notice, 2 weeks notice. It's not right for you to tell them that, you know what, your money is stuck somewhere else. You didn't ask them permission to put their money in another investment. You didn't ask them permission to delay them for another 6 months and a year. In fact, that wealth wasn't even yours in the first place. It wasn't even yours. So you find people are given wealth to keep and they agree to keep it, and when it comes time to pay, they don't want to pay the actual owner of the wealth. So be fair when it comes to that. Also, when it comes to people lending money to one another generally. So you find somebody gives a loan. It's not money to keep. Somebody says, you know what, you're in a spot of bother. Let me give you so much. You pay me after a month, 2 months. Make sure you write it down. That's part of the teaching of the Quran as well as the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then when it comes to pay, pay it. When it comes to pay, pay it. And the advice given in the Quran as well as the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is both ways. There's advice given to the one who is owed the money. If this person is good, they're going through a spot of bother, give them some time. وَإِنْ كَانَ ذُو عُسْرَةٍ فَنَظِرَةٌ إِلَى مَيْسَرَةٍ. Give them some time until they get wealth. But it doesn't mean that the one who has taken the wealth, it doesn't mean that you always quote this verse. Because the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam also says in a hadith that the one who takes the wealth of others and he doesn't intend to return this wealth back, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will destroy him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will destroy him. So the advice is given to both parties. You owed the money, try to be reasonable. You owing the money more so, make sure you are responsible and make sure you are able to pay. Don't take the wealth of others and then squander it. Because my beloved brothers and sisters in Islam, the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam tells us in a hadith, he says, لَتُؤَدُّنَّ الْحُقُوقَ إِلَىٰ أَهْلِهَا يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. You will most definitely give the rights back to those whom it is owed on the day of Qiyamah. And then he gives the example of, so much so, the sheep will be brought, and the one that had a horn who hit the one who didn't have a horn, they will be justice between the sheep. So what about when it comes to people's wealth and people's rights and people's huquq? My beloved brothers and sisters in Islam, it's not something to take lightly. And you find at times what's the saddest part is when it comes to owing money, generally those who don't have a lot are the ones who want to pay up on time. And those who have the most are looking how they can delay more and more. It's not always the case, but it's majority of the time. You find those who have the wealth, you're able to pay. The Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam tells you in a hadith, مَطْلُ الْغَنِيِّ ظُلْمٌ. A person who has the wealth to pay and he carries on delaying, then that is a form of oppression. These are just few points I wanted to touch on as a reminder to myself and yourselves. The huquq, the rights of one another that we have amongst us are many. Not only when it comes to wealth, when it comes to marriage, when it comes to living with one another, there are so many different rights. In fact, a Muslim has rights when he greets you. When his janazah passes, one of his rights is to follow his janazah, to perform salah on him, etc. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us goodness, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us from those who are just, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive our shortcomings. Remember, if you've had a dispute in wealth, you can always rectify it. At times, it may be the case where a person is owing 100,000 and you really can't pay and the other needs the wealth. At times, you may agree that, okay, pay me so much, pay me a little bit less, pay me over times, don't charge more, don't charge interest, but you can come to some sort of sulh and some sort of mutual agreement where it's easy for both parties. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us goodness and beneficial knowledge and grant us good halal wealth. Ameen. Sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.